The town of Eberswalde was quiet. It was supposed to be. This was East Germany in 1969. The German Democratic Republic, the GDR, a place where the state promised order. It promised safety. Crime was a capitalist disease, something that happened on the other side of the wall. Here, in the workers' paradise, people were meant to feel secure. Children were meant to play freely in the streets and the woods. And for a long time they did. Eberswalde was a small industrial town surrounded by forests. It was ordinary. People worked at the crane factory or the rolling mill. They lived in modest apartment blocks. Life was predictable. It was gray, maybe, but it was safe, or so everyone thought. Then, on May 31st, 1969, a 9-year-old boy named Lars Bense went missing. It was a Saturday, normal day. Lars had gone out to play. He was a good kid. He was supposed to be home for lunch, but he never came back. His parents started to worry as the hours ticked by. Afternoon turned into evening, worry turned into panic. They called the police, the Volkspolizei. Friends and neighbors joined the search. They called his name into the darkening woods. They checked every street, every corner. There was no sign of him. In a place like the GDR, a missing child was not just a family tragedy. It was a political problem. It was a crack in the perfect facade of the socialist state. The authorities wanted it resolved quickly. They wanted it resolved quietly. The search intensified. Hundreds of people combed the area. The police were thorough, methodical. But they found nothing. For 2 weeks, the town held its breath. Hope dwindled. Fear began to seep into the community. It was a feeling people weren't used to. This kind of thing didn't happen here. On June 14th, a railway worker made a grim discovery. In a cellar of a derelict building near the train tracks, he found the body of Lars Bense. The scene was horrific. The boy had been brutally murdered. He had been stabbed dozens of times. He had been strangled. There were also signs of sexual assault. The town of Eberswalde was plunged into shock. The horror of the crime was one thing, but the fact that it could happen here, in their town, was another. The state's promise of safety was broken. A monster was loose among them. The police, the Volkspolizei, had a murder investigation on their hands. A child murder. They had little experience with this kind of depravity. Their usual work involved petty theft, public drunkenness, or political dissent. This was different. This was pure evil. The investigation was massive. The police interviewed hundreds of people. They checked alibis, they looked for anyone with a criminal record, anyone who seemed strange or out of place. But they had no leads. The killer had left behind little evidence. He was like a ghost. The pressure from the party leadership in Berlin was immense. This case needed to be solved. It was an embarrassment to the GDR. It showed a sickness that wasn't supposed to exist. But as the weeks turned into months, the trail went cold, the investigation stalled. The fear in Eberswalde slowly faded, replaced by a quiet, lingering unease. People tried to get back to normal. They told themselves it was a one-time event, a horrible random act of violence. They tried to forget, and for 2 years, it seemed they were right. Life went on, the seasons changed. The murder of Lars Bense became a dark memory, a story whispered among adults to scare their children into staying close to home. Then, in the summer of 1971, it happened again. On August 15th, 2 more boys vanished. Their names were Henry Speck and Mario Gantz. They were friends. Henry was 10, Mario was 9. They had gone out to play near a pond on the edge of town. They were looking for tadpoles. Like Lars Bense, they were supposed to be home for dinner, and like Lars Bense, they never arrived. When the news spread that 2 more boys were missing, the old fear came rushing back, stronger than before. This was not a random act, this was a pattern. The monster was back. Panic gripped Eberswalde. The parents locked their doors. They refused to let their children play outside. The streets, once filled with the sounds of kids playing, fell silent. The town was paralyzed by terror. The state could no longer pretend this was an isolated incident. They had a serial killer on their hands. The term wasn't widely used in the GDR, but that's what he was. A predator who hunted children. The investigation was relaunched with a new urgency, and on a scale never before seen in East German history. The Ministry for State Security, the feared Stasi, got involved. They were experts in surveillance and control, but they were also out of their depth. They were used to hunting political enemies, not psychopaths. The search for Henry and Mario was frantic. This time, the police knew what they might be looking for. They scoured the woods, the abandoned buildings, every possible hiding place. After 2 days, they found the bodies. They were in a wooded area, not far from where they were last seen. The scene was chillingly familiar. The boys had been sexually assaulted. They had been strangled. The killer had used a cord, a thin, strong cord pulled tight around their neck. This detail, whispered among the police and then leaked to the public, gave the killer his name. People started calling him the Kaiserschneider mortar, the cheese wire killer. The name stuck. It was a mundane, domestic term for an act of unimaginable horror. The GDR was now facing a crisis. Its carefully constructed image of a crime-free society was shattered. The state's inability to catch the killer was a glaring failure. The manhunt became the largest in the country's history. Investigators from all over East Germany descended on Eberswalde. They set up a special commission. They interviewed thousands of men between the ages of 16 and 60. They took fingerprints. They checked alibis for the days of all three murders. The effort was colossal. But the killer was clever. He was hiding in plain sight. He was one of them. He could be anyone. A neighbor, a factory worker, a quiet young man who kept to himself. The paranoia was intense. People started looking at each other with suspicion. The social fabric of the town was tearing apart. The investigators were desperate. Traditional police work was failing. They had a mountain of information, but no clear suspect. So they decided to try something new. Something radical for the rigid, ideologically driven world of the GDR. They decided to create a psychological profile of the killer. They brought in experts, including a renowned psychologist named Hans Schuchek. This was almost unheard of. Criminality was supposed to be a product of capitalist decay, not a result of a broken mind. But the authorities were willing to try anything. Schuchek and his team studied the crime scenes. They analyzed the victimology. They tried to get inside the killer's head. They concluded they were looking for a young man. Probably in his late teens or early 20s. He was likely a local, someone who knew the area well. He was intelligent, but an underachiever, someone who felt powerless and insignificant in his daily life. The murders were his way of asserting control, of feeling powerful. The sexual component suggested deep-seated psychosexual issues, possibly stemming from a difficult childhood or problems with women. He would be a loner, but he would also be able to appear normal, to blend in. He would not stand out in a crowd. This profile was a major breakthrough. It gave the police a new lens through which to view their thousands of potential suspects. They started re-examining their files, looking for individuals who fit this description. They focused on young men with a history of minor offenses, particularly sexual ones. The net began to tighten. The police got a tip. A woman remembered seeing a young man on a bicycle near the area where Henry and Mario were found. He seemed out of place. She gave a description. It matched another witness statement from the time of the first murder, 2 years earlier. A detail that had been overlooked. The police cross-referenced this with their lists of interviewees. One name kept coming up, a 21-year-old apprentice cook named Erwin Hagedorn. On the surface, Hagedorn didn't seem like a monster. He was quiet, polite, a bit awkward. He lived with his mother. He had no serious criminal record. He was just another face in the crowd. But when the police looked closer, they saw that he fit the profile perfectly. He had a troubled childhood. His father had abandoned the family. He had a difficult, overbearing mother. He was intelligent, but had failed to live up to his potential. He felt like a failure. He had a history of petty crimes, including voyeurism and minor sexual offenses against animals. He was a loner who had trouble forming relationships. He was invisible. The police brought him in for questioning on November 12, 1971. At first, Hagedorn was calm. He denied everything. He had an alibi for the day the boys were murdered. He said he was at the cinema. He was a convincing liar. But the investigators were persistent. They pressed him for details. His story started to crumble. The times didn't match up. The movie he claimed to have seen wasn't playing that day. For hours, they interrogated him. They confronted him with the evidence, with the inconsistencies in his story. They presented him with the psychological profile, essentially describing him to himself. And then he broke. The confession came pouring out. He admitted to everything. The murder of Lars Bense, the murders of Henry Specht and Mario Gantz. He described the crimes in cold, detached detail. He spoke not with remorse, but with a strange sense of pride. He had finally done something that made him feel important. He had outsmarted the entire state security apparatus for more than 2 years. He told them how he had lured the boys. He had promised to show them something interesting in the woods. He had a friendly face. The children trusted him. Once they were in a secluded spot, he would attack. He described the weapon, a cord he carried with him. He explained the sexual assaults and the stabbings as part of a ritual, a way to exert ultimate power over his victims. He confessed that the urge to kill had been building in him for years, a dark fantasy he felt compelled to act out. His motive was a chilling cocktail of sexual sadism, resentment, and a desperate need for recognition. In his mundane life, he was a nobody. As the Beast of Eberswalde, he was infamous. He was powerful. He had held an entire town in a grip of fear. For him, that was a victory. The arrest of Erwin Hagedorn brought a wave of relief to Eberswalde. The monster had been caught. But the relief was mixed with a renewed sense of shock. He was one of them. He was the quiet boy from down the street. It was a terrifying realization that evil could wear such an ordinary face. The trial was a state-managed affair. The GDR wanted to project an image of swift, decisive justice. The evidence against Hagedorn was overwhelming. His own detailed confession sealed his fate. He was paraded before the court, a symbol of the deviancy that the state had now purged from its system. He showed no emotion during the proceedings. He was found guilty on 3 counts of murder. The sentence was death. In East Germany, the death penalty was carried out in secret. There was no public announcement. On September 15, 1972, Erwin Hagedorn was taken to a prison in Leipzig. He was led into a room, believing he was going for a final medical examination. There, an executioner walked up behind him and shot him in the back of the neck with a pistol. It was called the Unerwarteter Nachschuss, the unexpected close-range shot. It was quick, efficient, and brutal. His body was cremated, and his ashes were buried in an unmarked grave. The state did its best to erase him from history. The case files were sealed. The media was forbidden from ever mentioning his name again. The story of the Hees wire killer was supposed to disappear, just like Hagedorn himself. The GDR wanted to restore its image of a crime-free society. It wanted people to forget that for 2 years, a monster had walked among them, a monster their system had not been able to predict or prevent. But people don't forget, in Eberswalde the memory lingered. The names of Lars Benz, Henry Specht, and Mario Gantz were not forgotten by their families or the community. The fear that Hagedorn had created left a deep scar. The case became a kind of dark folklore, a cautionary tale passed down through generations. The story of Erwin Hagedorn is more than just a true crime case. It's a look into a society that prided itself on control, and how it reacted when faced with something utterly uncontrollable. It shows the limits of a totalitarian state in the face of human darkness. The GDR could police thoughts and control borders, but it could not police the twisted depths of a single broken mind. And that's where the unsolved part of the story lies. The case itself was solved. The police caught the killer. The state executed him. Justice, in its harshest form, was served. But the real mystery was never solved. The why. What was it that turned a quiet apprentice cook into a sadistic child killer? Was it his upbringing? Was it a defect in his brain? Was it some latent evil that had been waiting for a chance to emerge? These are questions that no police investigation or court verdict could ever truly answer. Erwin Hagedorn was a product of his own unique, horrifying psychology. He was a ghost in the machine of the GDR, a man whose internal world was so violent and depraved that it eventually had to spill out into the real world. The case forced East Germany to confront an uncomfortable truth. Evil isn't just a capitalist import. It can grow anywhere. It can grow in the quietest towns, behind the most ordinary faces. It can be the neighbor you nod to every morning. The search for Erwin Hagedorn was a hunt for a monster, but in the end, they just found a man. And that perhaps was the most terrifying discovery of all. The case of the cheese wire killer ended with a single gunshot in a Leipzig prison, but the questions it raised about the nature of evil and the secrets that society keeps echo to this day.